Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Watching Privacy. What are we on? Seven, I think. Yeah, we'll call it lucky number seven.
Seven.
And we've got Brett and Raji with us as always. And so maybe we'll just dive right into this week in privacy. And we've got a couple bigger news items that I think came out, and pretty much what rolled out for the majority of the week as new details came out was this T-Mobile data leak. So I would say not so much on the privacy side of things, a little bit maybe more on the security side of things. Um, but for T-Mobile, this looks bad. Like this is probably I think numbers 5 or 6, maybe even 7. A security breach or data dump that they've had posted online. But thankfully, if you're a T-Mobile customer, they're offering 2 years of McAfee data protection, which arguably is I don't know how well that's really protecting your data with those guys, but yeah, ultimately I think there was a couple million what do you call current users, potential users, anybody who applied for credit with T-Mobile basically got exposed, and we're talking names, date of birth, social security numbers, driver's licenses, um, you name it, pretty much all went out. So, what do you guys think?
I think it's pretty bad. I pulled this out of one of the articles that we were checking out. And first of all, whenever you get somebody on Twitter named Undoxed tweeting about having data, not a good thing. But the hackers claim they got the name, social security, driver's license, all that kind of stuff, and they were selling it. I mean, they basically were broadcasting, hey, we got this data. You want to buy it? We got 36 million T-Mobile user records. So it's terrible for T-Mobile because it's not new for this to happen to T-Mobile.
I mean the leak itself was not surprising. These days
No.
has become a commonplace. What really surprised me is that offer, as you said, is that what McAfee? Is that what?
Yeah, McAfee.
Yeah, McAfee. The first thing that came to mind is you got to be kidding me because I've seen the Avast debacle. I think it was last year, a year back, where the antivirus software is the virus.
Yeah, exactly.
So the antivirus software was tracking all the movements of the user and the websites they visit and whatnot because everything goes through that. And then they were selling that information to Google and other surveillance companies out there. And who knows what's happening with these so-called antivirus systems. So that's the first thing that came to mind. Hey, here we go. We lost your information and install this. We'll get more. Not that McAfee is doing it, but that's the first thing that occurred to me, having seen the vast debacle.
One other thing as I look at this, look what this dude said. Someone on a cybercrime forum began selling his stuff. I mean, it's they're going like you said. It's like you're using anti virus software to create viruses. You're using all this kind of stuff that's supposed to protect you from these things, and they're the ones actually doing it to us. Dude is going to a cybercrime forum selling the data. It's it's pretty amazing what's going on out there right now.
Yeah, one thing that I remember, I was listening to the Vergecast podcast on the way to the office today, and the guy was saying that T-Mobile made a point to announce that no financial data was exposed, but just your social security number, date of birth, and driver's license, and your name. So it's like, well, we didn't really expose your financial data, but technically, you put all the other dots together, and a lot more of your financial data will get exposed as a result of what they've done. Is there anything organizations can do to? I mean, it's not like T-Mobile's a small company, but it's also not their first dust up with these kinds of data leaks, right? There's got to be better practices, either regulation or just general security practices of storing this kind of information in some way that's clearly easily leakable, right, or exposable.
Apparently, they didn't learn, or maybe we shouldn't be as flippant, but it seems like they would be extra vigilant, and they know that. I would assume that once you've been attacked, that once you're a big brand and you've been attacked, you're a target going forward, and so you have to be even more vigilant than you were before. I don't know. It just feels like their customers are the ones that pay the price constantly for them not being as vigilant as they probably should be at this point.
Does anybody
Also,
leave T-Mobile because of this? Like the average customer, do they really like be like, oh, T-Mobile is not so good, like let me get out of here? I'm not sure really. With the consolidation of wireless carriers in the US, it's kind of difficult to even pop around, right?
I mean, the question is, are others any better?
Yeah,
And
It's a
yeah,
great question.
and that is likely what's happening. I mean, what happened to what Experian, right? Well, after all that data leak with hundreds of millions, it's not like people have any option to choose choose those options
Yeah.
compared to say your mobile carrier.
The other thing about this too is it said that they're offering this data all going back to the mid 1990s. So it's like you're getting historical data, you're getting current data. These dudes are probably getting ready to run some trend analysis. These data guys. It's you gotta like joke with it because you almost need to feel like you gotta cry if you don't make a joke out of it at this point.
And it is likely, it is likely possible that only T-Mobile data is exposed and not Sprint data because the backends are not integrated. Again,
Oh, what a great thing for that to be, please, right? You're saved by the lack of integration between the two. Yeah, that's kind of
that's me
funny too.
that's me speculating, but
I think T-Mobile's in trouble for some of the Sprint stuff. I remember reading, I think maybe a week or two ago, the merger thing was being reevaluated. Some way they were, I guess, shorting customers or weren't following the rules that the FTC said. So I think it's just been a little bad period for T-Mobile in general. But let's shift gears a little bit. I think one article that kind of went under the radar, I think for a little bit. I don't think it was last week, but it might have been the week before. But the Facebook Giphy, whatever the debate is on how we pronounce it, acquisition, I thought was a little bit on the interesting side because a lot of people don't realize, I guess, similar to the kind of maybe the podcast thread from last week, what actually happens when you send someone a GIF or a GIF. I'm going to say GIF because that's what it's supposed to be to somebody using one of your messaging platforms. And Giphy is integrated in a lot of different tools. Most, I think, chats would probably use Giphy or Tenor or a few other providers. But what happens actually when that GIF is sent and when you search, they know exactly what you're searching for. They know your location. They know your device. They know when you actually select a GIF, the URL that's generated for that GIF is unique to you. So then every time that GIF loads, they know that it's a trail of your basically initiation, right? And so there's a lot of backend tracking that happens. There's tracking pixels inside the GIF on top of it that happens with GIF. And one of the better takes I saw was I think it was also from The Verge maybe, or Make Use Of was a website, one of the two. But in order to even partner with Giphy, you have to agree that you're going to submit the device's tracking identifier. And they say it's for personalize, improve, understand, and continue to operate the services, which is about as vague as it gets for every terms and conditions. But
that's like the catch-all phrase whenever they come for your data. They all just basically cut and paste that last piece in because that's what it's all about. That's all we're trying to do here, apparently.
Yeah, people think you're just sending a picture, but there's a lot more underneath it that I guess you just don't even realize when you're copying and pasting and searching and sending things, right?
And also that first statement, I'll go with your pronunciation, Tejas. Giphy collects data you submit yourself directly, indirectly from third parties, and automatically. Indirectly from third parties. That's the thing I guess most people are probably kind of missing with using this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and for Facebook, I mean, it's obviously a big win because now you're getting integrated into other messaging platforms and you have access to what people are searching for, what the device and content and all that kind of stuff. So it's a big win for them. I'm not sure if it goes through or not. I guess maybe it'll get a little bit more scrutiny. FTC tried to launch another allegation about Facebook buying companies this week. So hopefully it's under the spotlight and people understand the implications of this kind of thing. But at the end of the day, I guess, are GIFs a commodity? Like, would you pay to send a GIF to anybody? How is that like a booming business that could be sustainable in a privacy-centric way? I'm not sure it really could be. But then again, do you really need the GIFs? I guess they're nice, but it's not like a need. But there's a lot of ways to look at it.
Like a Trojan horse thing again. When you send it, it's a nice little cutesy thing, and then you realize you're not just sending a cutesy thing, you're sending access to your data, and whoever potentially with this third party angle. You asked the question, would it be worth it to pay for it? My quick answer is like the knee jerk, hell no, not for me at least.
I didn't follow the story because the last time I used a GIF was in 2000, and now I'm serious, and I don't plan to
Wow.
change that.
2000. So yeah, we put Raju strictly in the no column for that.
And that GIF might have been like an animation of like a product, like someone clicking around on something, not like a clip from a movie or something like that.
Was it Microsoft Bob? Maybe it was.
All right. And then I guess another quick one we'll talk about is this Chinese privacy law seems to be picking up steam a little bit and getting, I don't think as much coverage as it probably deserves. But on one hand, some might consider China to come up with data privacy laws to be a little bit also ironic, given government surveillance and control is essentially the Chinese Communist Party's like MO. But I guess did you guys understand the differentiation between like private company collection versus state collection and how they kind of vary?
I called this out because it was out of the Wall Street Journal, just to kind of set the stage for that. It seems like at least the distinction that's being made by this particular this analyst. Um, China, the government is aligning itself with consumers to fight data theft and privacy, whereas they're saying in Europe and the U.S. policies, it's more aligned with protection from private companies. I don't know. It's such a unique kind of discussion because when you think of China, the last thing you think of is privacies and freedoms for the most part. But in this instance, when it comes to data, they're making a compelling case. Now, I'll turn it over to you for a second, Raju. But I also want to just point out, Beijing is expected to maintain broad access over that data. So you're protecting the data from companies, but then the data is pretty much going to be in the hands of the government. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword, so to speak, at least from my perspective, a little bit.
In a lot of countries, the government knows more about the individual than private companies, and I think that is the case in majority of the countries. And in US, the private companies know more about it. Part of the reason is the government allowed monopolies to thrive, monopolies, duopolies, and all of that. And that is the pushback that we are seeing, where now FTC is trying to fight back and correct some of the mistakes that they have done in the past. And because the private companies gone too far, and the incentives of the private companies are not always aligned, because they are supposed to be a profit generating machine, and that is not always aligned with people's intentions. And the pushback will not go to the private companies, then it will come back to governments and say, why did you allow this merger in the first place? The Giphy thing is another similar example. There is a pushback there because they say it shouldn't be possible in the first place. And what China is doing, at least looking at all these recent moves they made against tech companies, what I see is China is cracking down on these tech companies and preventing them from becoming monopolies, and which US did not do, but China is doing that. I think that is what's happening. And will Chinese government, will they have access to all this information? Yes, just like many other governments out there. And again, when you're living under a certain law, you basically take a few things, you give up some information, whether it is US or a China or a India or a UK. People move to countries where they are comfortable with the local laws. If they are not, they'll just vote with their feet. They just walk out and move to a different country. In this case, China basically said we're not gonna allow monopolies in the country, and they're gonna have a firm hold. I think that's how I'm interpreting not just this move, but a series of moves they made, be it the move on education, be it a crackdown on their financial Alipay or all other financial institutions. All of them follow the same trend where they are basically doing the work that FTC did not do in US.
Yeah, I think one thing that you said that just hit me really hard was, the monopoly duopoly conversation, right? At the end of the day, if the government is sucking up all the information from all private companies, essentially, then it's in their best interest to have that information at the private level be as fragmented as possible, and then they aggregate it at the government level, right? Why let a private company aggregate, a lot of different pieces of information at that point? Because that makes the private company too powerful. Instead, we're just going to cripple the private companies, keep it, as spread and as many competitors in whatever tech areas that they can. And at the end of the day, it'll all roll up to the government, and the government will still get everything they want with just less big companies to deal with, or PR issues or anything like that, right? So government wins, and um, in the farce of customer privacy, but it's not really much like that, right?
Yeah, I think in US in particular, when certainly government can get this information from private companies, and that is part of the reason why we haven't seen any strict privacy laws. Well, the majority of the companies are here in US, so which means there is an incentive, financial incentive for to not do that, right? Then if you look at all these monopolies, duopolies, they are not just monopolies and duopolies in US. They are globally they are, and that is the reason some of the other countries and the local governments are adopting it because their citizen information is being collected and pushed elsewhere, and they are the ones who are being proactive and rolling out these laws. I think this is the virtual walls are gonna go up between countries because of the abuse that's going on in the system currently.
I think this is going to be a deeper discussion. We could do like a whole series of shows on this. I think because it's the philosophies of governments and companies and consumers, and depending on what your government structure is and your approach, you may find it much easier to roll out privacy. In the states, we already know it's going to be a big battle. It's already a big battle because you got federal and you got state, and we're more driven by like states' rights to a certain extent, whereas China, of course, is very centralized power of from a federal government perspective.
Mhm.
They can push down things and have them go into effect much more quickly. The kind of the other end of that though is then they have control over all of the data to a sort of certain extent, versus here where, like Raju said, the data is in the hands of the corporations right now. Is there a right answer to either approach, or is there something in the middle? We could talk about this forever, and I think we'll be dealing with this for a long time to come.
There is another aspect, Brent, where a developing country versus a developed country. In a
Mm,
developing country,
yeah.
you'll notice that the government works very closely with the entities, the large corporations out there. We have seen that
Mm,
in say Taiwan. We have seen that in Korea. We have seen that in Japan. We have seen that in UK. If you go back to 1800s, so historically speaking, the governments work with the larger entities when they're in a developing mode. In a developed country now that is established and that goes there, and US is a developed country, so that is another reason we have seen that transition. There is that angle to it
yeah.
from a broader economic point of view.
Yeah, and I would say in this country, big companies tell the governments what to do. We're more established, of course. I mean, longer, but big companies basically kind of run things here until they run amok, and then they have to be pulled back. I mean, we're going all the way back to like the Sherman Antitrust Act, the 1890 or thereabouts, where Standard Oil had 90% of the game when it came to oil and fuel, and got so big that they had to be broken up. But it takes a lot to get to that point here. But I think it's really interesting what you point out around the developing countries, and they kind of collaborate. It seems like more effectively with, let's say, the fast startups that have potential game changing business models or technologies, and the government may, in these emerging countries, seem to work hand in hand with them more than here. It's like our big companies have been bossing running things for a while until they get to the point where everybody feels like they have to be stopped before it gets out of hand, and it always has to get to that tipping point. It seems right
Mhm.
here in the states.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll have to do a deeper dive on just kind of country approaches and digging into maybe rules and regulations around the world and how they kind of vary and common threads along different regions and different countries. But let's say the last article I think or deep dive, yeah, close enough, same thing. It
Did I
was
jump the gun, man?
I jumped the gun, whatever. It's all fun.
What do you
Let's
want? What we can switch up right on the fly, man. What do you want to talk about?
I was just going to mention this Tech Radar article about how a lot of people don't realize that they're being tracked when they are shopping. It was kind of a shorter article, but the conversation, I guess, around it kind of blew up a lot more than maybe the meat of the article itself. But it was basically, if you use your credit card at like a merchant online or in person, and you associate um, any information, so like oftentimes it's kind of like these reward programs, right? Like if you go to Kroger, you go to CVS, you go to um, Walgreens, you go to Whole Foods, wherever, right? You're always associating some loyalty membership program with your transaction data. So then you know exactly, or the store knows exactly who you are, what you're buying, how much of it you're buying it for. And then on top of that, with the rise of just kind of facial recognition in general, how many stores are really implementing these kinds of cameras and tracking systems that you have no idea about, right? You walk into a store, there's no like even 50-page terms and conditions that you're reading when you walk into that store. You're just abiding by their rules and are kind of subject to them all, right? And so um, I think there's just a lot of people don't realize like how much tracking probably is happening at the store at the retail level, because a lot of the attention goes to like online and maybe more digital tracking, but in-person tracking is still very real, and retail tracking is big. I think a big sign of that is there was just a news article yesterday about how Amazon is looking at building out big box retail stores. So you go full circle
Mhm.
from basically running every mom and pop retail stop out of business, and then we're going to come back and build our own big box retail stores in place of those, essentially. So I
That's
don't know if you guys have any experience with this or saw anything about it, and have any more to add.
I think a common man doesn't know the level of tracking that goes on in there. Just a couple of weeks back, we went to a store, and a store that we have never been to here in Austin, and my wife swiped her card, and then just walked out. And a minute later, she got the receipt in an email, and she did not provide her email. She did not provide her phone number, but she received a receipt in her email, and she was freaked out. How do they know more about me, right? End of the day, I think they were using Square or something,
Yeah,
and
Square.
Square automatically collects all this data because of this. They are they are the hub. They are at the intermediate level, collecting all this information across these sources and mapping, tying all of this. All you need to do is provide your phone number or an email address once, and then they have you, and they can map your location and whatnot. On top of it, all you have to do is map they or a store that scans your face and does facial recognition, and then swipe your card at that store. Then all of that is permanently mapped in there, and that's what's going on.
yeah.
And only if some of us who look into it deeply are the ones that are familiar, and we are an extreme minority. But a common man doesn't know that it's going on, and they are obviously going to be freaking out when something like this happens.
Yeah. I'm just gonna pop this up again real quick because Raju actually you kind of outlined what this thing said from this article. It says what once you go to a merchant either and use your credit card online or offline, they got certain information, and then when you come in the store and you use that same card, and maybe they have facial recognition, so now they've mapped your face to your personal information. And as this thing says, large vendors such as Walmart now associate phone and email and cards with your facial recognition information. So they've got you. And I'll say, I think this whole pandemic and having to go contactless, that might have been the biggest gift to companies that there has been, because a lot of transactions and interactions that were analog, you go into a store, you pay with cash, you don't use your loyalty card, they don't know who you are. They just know that somebody came in and bought some stuff. Now, because of contactless, they know exactly who you are, what you buy, when you buy it, how much of it you buy, and how often you buy it. Look at the power and the data that got gifted to them because of this need to be contactless. It really accelerated this whole conversation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like the amount of stores that you go to nowadays, even if it's like a food truck here in Austin or something, a lot of, I would say a vast majority don't even take cash anymore, right? It's just not their cup of tea, and they're all using either these Square POS systems or some other POS system that we talked about a couple of weeks ago about how those systems do a deep level of tracking, and people have no idea about it.
Th-
Um,
These are these are all
but
pass through aggregators where when a lot of information passes through a common system, they try to take advantage of it and map the patterns and try to make money other way by selling that information. Not that everyone's doing it, but there is that possibility, and they try to monetize it in multiple ways. Like Square is in the middle, right? Because a lot of merchant use it on one side, a lot of customers use it on the other side. The same thing is the antivirus thing we are talking about. Avast is in that middleman, and that's the reason they are trying to take advantage of it. The same thing we have seen in the past with the payroll systems like ADP, because they have all this information on one side, and then they have their transactions and being made on the other side. In in every single scenario, they are these middlemen. They have all the information. Some genius somewhere said, "Hey, we have all this information. We can monetize it." Not thinking about the privacy implications. And sure, they got their check. They're making money, but they are abusing people's privacy and all that information.
Yeah, I think that's why this is probably a better segue of like not knowing what you're tracked at work. Now we can flash the very fancy graphic that we have for our deep dive of the week. It kind of goes hand in hand with customers at a retail store in person not knowing you're really being tracked, and then employees at a company of all sorts not really knowing you're tracked and how much I guess surveillance is really going on. So this one, Teleperformance, I was tracked overseas. I think it was a UK company, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in Europe, which I would imagine the regulation would protect them a lot more. But what do you call? This one was I didn't really go through that one as much. I don't think. Did Brent or Roger? Did you see this Teleperformance one as much?
I could just read off a bit of this here. Multinational call center used by dozens of leading UK companies has been criticized for what unions have called the intrusive monitoring of home working staff and their families. And their families. Just thought I'd point that out, as well as asking workers to hand over biometric and medical data. That paragraph alone is chilling when you think about what it just said. Not it's not enough just to get the employees and their family stuff. I mean, what's going on in the family and biometric and medical data? What the hell do they need all that for?
I mean, obviously to provide stellar customer support, right? The other one that was pretty funny was Amazon had one too, of course, about how they track it, and I think this motherboard article, another article on the same topic, I thought was probably one of the funnier headlines was Amazon will monitor workers' keystrokes to combat data theft, which is the irony of as they're not stealing your data because you have to opt into it, but who's the one really collecting the data and taking it at the end of the day? The employee who's working or the company who's doing the surveillance? Who's the real data thief at that point? And then Amazon has their stories about the drivers as well, cameras for them. Obviously, warehouse workers have a lot of difficulties and what do you call surveillance that happens inside those facilities. And so, I mean, ultimately, I guess there are, people would say that your employer should trust you, and through that trust, someone's going to perform well. And if you have to resort to tracking mechanisms, probably not the best way to really, for long-term success of your own company is not the best way. But at the same time, it's also probably net negative for you if your employees know that you're tracking you, because you're just really not breeding employees, I guess, there. But what do you guys think? Have you seen more of these go on from other companies as well, or seen a trend? I guess an uptick, probably, like Brent was saying with the pandemic, just more people working at home and feeling they need to be like surveilled, essentially, because companies won't trust them to work at home for some reason. Um, as if walking through the halls of an office in person was some kind of metric for productivity. But clearly people or bigger companies probably feel a certain type of way about this.
We have seen bunch of companies come up, pop up, and their businesses take off because there are a lot of companies looking for such surveillance tools, essentially to monitor so-called employee productivity, right? uh, that's an unfortunate trend. We're noticing it, and in fact, even I've seen one from Microsoft launch features where they say, "Hey, you can monitor your employees and whatnot." There was a pushback, and Microsoft had to pull back some of these things. But in general, when you talk about surveillance, we've been talking about consumer or a customer surveillance out there. Us as a customer, being tracked and whatnot. But there's not enough discussion happening for employee surveillance, because an employer knows a lot about an individual, their personal data. When you join a company, they are doing let's say a background check and whatnot. So an employer knows about it. Then there are aspects like financial information, the payroll data and whatnot, maybe healthcare information, the benefits, your family information. So employer knows a lot about an employee. How are they really keeping that? That question is not being asked and discussed today. Is an employer making sure that the tools they use, the third party vendors they use, are keeping their employees information safe? I don't think a lot of companies are doing that at this point, number one. Number two, is the employee asking the employer on how their information is being kept? Today, I don't know if that is happening too. I think both has to happen. The employer has to be open with the employee, saying that this is how we are protecting your data, because these days that is the expectation. When a company takes privacy of an employee seriously, the respect for that company goes up. In other words, just like these days companies want to work for environmentally conscious companies, they also like to work for privacy conscious companies out there. And these two are related. When you say environmentally conscious, if you look at, you can safely say that something like pollution is a byproduct of, say, oil companies and all those companies, right? Just the same way, surveillance and privacy abuse, this is a byproduct of ad industry. They both are very related. And it is time to basically stop the privacy abuse as well as the nature abuse. And in both cases, just like people and employees want to work for companies that are environmentally conscious, they want to work for companies that are privacy conscious. I think that is the trend we are seeing there. Increasingly, this will become true, and it will become a responsibility of the employers to make sure that all the employee information is secured and kept in check.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like rocket science, because I mean, at the end of the day, if you sign up for a service, you have to check the box for terms and conditions and privacy policy. When you are employed by some company, there should be mutual disclosure, essentially, of what is happening with my information, right? Especially when it comes to payroll, productivity, clicking, surveillance, monitoring, all these kinds of things. What is happening with that? And why isn't there a privacy policy for employees, basically, and for an employee relationship, and disclosure that your data is collected in X, Y, and Z ways, and this is how we use it, and we don't share it or send it outside, whatever, right? I mean, just even I think smaller companies probably generally have like better intentions, but larger companies probably not so much. I think it's just kind of the evolution of how companies kind of evolve in size. One crazy thing that we came across was this, I guess, employee performance monitoring kind of segment, right? And so I guess if you start searching for it online, you'll get a couple different results because a lot of it will be about like employee performance in terms of like annual assessments and things like that. But these guys, is this the Work Pulse guys, right, Brent? I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, these guys are wild. Like, I don't know if you can zoom in on that screenshot a little bit if anybody actually it pays attention, but it tells you basically like what apps people are currently using. On the screenshot, this person named Maria was using Facebook, and it like shows up in red that it's like unproductive employee basically, which is just wild to me. That like checking a camera feed or whatever that when you're active, making sure you're there is one thing, but this is complete level of like full monitoring. And I guess on one hand, I see the argument that employees should not expect any level of privacy on company issued devices, whether it's your company phone or your company laptop. Everything can be tracked. I would imagine under the guise of compliance or regulation or something along those lines. In certain industries, it might make more sense than others. But if you're a customer service rep, handling returns for some online store, do you really need to track all this kind of stuff, right? If the work is being done, the work is being done. But um, this stuff goes far really quickly, and you would have no idea that it's installed on your machine at all, right? Let alone on your phone, same way.
And the result of this is its impact on trust. And employees simply will not trust companies that are resorting it, because they are doing it because they don't trust their employees. And trust is not something you can measure, unfortunately,
No.
or fortunately. So, and I think that is where so people or employees will end up voting with their feet. They just move towards companies that respect people's privacy.
The trusting is big because like oftentimes like if you one of the bigger things I'll read, like if I go down like a Reddit rabbit hole sometimes and look at like people, I think personal finance subreddit or something where someone's like, oh, company A is offering me this, company B is offering me this, should I move around or what should I do? And like granted, you take Reddit comments with like a massive grain of salt, maybe a chunk of salt or a block of salt, but um, everyone just seems like not happy with their employer. And I mean, everyone's obviously a stretch, but I'd say a good chunk of people who probably work don't really care much for their employer. And that's because that trust has probably been consistently broken through many actions that they've done over time, right? I guess this isn't really like a privacy thing, but privacy plays an aspect of it where, that lack of loyalty is what ultimately, that'll make someone jump from one company to another for an extra 2% raise or something like that, right? Even though you're restarting and things like that. Just because if the company shows no loyalty, no trust, no transparency, no goodwill to an employee, why should the employee ever return that favor, right? And I think privacy and strong regulations around trust is a good way a company can retain good talent. And they think that they're squeezing more out of people, probably because some management consultant from Big Four told them to. But that's not really how people generally react. And that like qualitative aspect of trust can't be metriced on a spreadsheet that's analyzed and put through some BI tool, essentially, right?
Exactly, and that's where the the culture and all of these come into play. Trust is and culture, they go hand in hand. Um, the I would say the culture of the company, or the strength of the culture of a company, is indirectly proportional to a company's attrition rate. You can look at a company's attrition rate and tell how good or how bad the culture of a company is. So if attrition is say 20%, 30%, unfortunately in some of the companies that is the case, you can tell that you don't have to look at any of the stats. You can tell that there's no strong culture in there and there's no sense of trust in there. So those two are extremely related, and you can safely say that the ones that are monitoring at this level, that the ones that do not trust their employees well enough, you can safely say that the strength of the culture is going to be on the lower side. That said, regarding that article, there is always a context to it. In some cases, in some very specific cases, some of these make sense. Like if you are entering a bank vault, you should expect to be surveilled, and that is the expectation bidirectionally, right? If you are, let's say, if you are in a system that has access to all your key devices in a data center, and that is critical point to access some of the data, well, you expect that keystrokes to be tracked there. So the context is extremely important.
Mhm.
But even in that case, there is a mutual understanding between the employee and the employer that it is going to be tracked, because you're going to see cameras all over, and you know that you're going to be tracked, even when you're accessing sensitive information from a particular device. That communication and openness between an employer and employee is the key. In a lot of cases, what happens is the the tracking and the surveillance happens, but the employee doesn't know about it. And that is what this is no different from what happens on the consumer side or the customer side. And we have been saying where people should know and they should be able to opt in. And even in an employee's case, that is true. Employees should know what they are getting into, and they can choose whether to get into it or not.
I'm just popping this up from my buddy Bob Fagel, and I'm sorry there is an echo. I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but he has an interesting question. What are the laws and ethics of employee monitoring and privacy?
Take a
Is
guess.
there? Are there? Do companies have? This is a very good question.
Yeah, I honestly have no idea either. Maybe we got to do some more researching and figuring out. I would imagine there's got to be. I mean, I could almost bet that there's nothing on a federal level, and maybe some states are better than others, but that's probably the extent of what that's there. Maybe some countries are doing it better than others as well. Um, but yeah, I think it's not at the end of the day, the people who are like Brent was saying about how big companies control a lot of government aspects. It's the companies that are employing the employees that control policy. So it's not like the employees have like a massive base of influence to say that we want some laws and disclosures around these kinds of things, right? So it could be inherently not really equal in that sense. But definitely something we'll try to dig into a little bit more and maybe talk about next week or the week after. But um, anything else on this kind of employee management, monitoring, tracking, surveillance?
I think what will likely happen is just like when an employee signs up to a company or joins a company, will likely have an agreement or openness about the privacy, and that's where we are headed. It's just that the companies that take this seriously and jump on it early on are the ones that will benefit from it. Then there is other aspect to it. Employees, when they request some data to the employer, an employer may say, "Hey, we protect your information." But there is also sad reality is employers intention may be right, but it may not be out of their control. For example, an employer may trust, like in this case, like an ADP or Intuit Payroll, right? I'm sure there are a lot of companies that use these companies for the payroll information, but they likely don't know that their payroll information is being sold to someone else. And when they themselves don't have the visibility into this, how can they provide guarantee to the employees about it? That lack of visibility it will hurt all parties in this case. So, which means that is where the laws and all of those will come in, like the DPAs and that exists in the GDPR world, will likely become common to make this a standard.
Yeah, the disclosure is big. I mean, honestly, like if you think you're doing right, disclosing it only helps you, right? If there's something wrong and then a candidate brings it up to you, maybe it's a good option to reevaluate what's going on and why, or being able to justify why certain things work a certain way. So I mean, I don't really see a downside if you think you're doing good stuff, but I think that's a really good note to kind of wrap up on then. Before I forget, because these guys will always get on my case, please like, share, subscribe. As a true YouTuber, I feel like I got to get in the habit of saying that probably at the beginning or the end of each one of these shows. But thanks for joining. Be back next week. And yeah, I guess that's all. Have a good weekend.
See you.
Adios.